think a lot of people get focused on these kinds of teachings, Neo Advaita and so on, but they don't necessarily have enough of the experiential component. And perhaps I don't, for whatever reason, maybe they don't have some practice which can give them a taste of it or whatever. But they end up, there's a Tibetan saying, which is, don't mistake understanding for realization. And then it goes on to say, don't mistake realization for liberation. But I think some people fall into that trap where they read so many books and listen to so many talks, and they end up kind of brainwashing themselves with an understanding, which is maybe a valid understanding, but it is not supported by their direct experience. And they kind of assume that they've had the realization that these books talk about, but there's something missing. And it's not a healthy state to be in.
Hello, Rick.
Hello, good to see you, Ilona.
Great to see you again.
Yeah.
And this time you are on my show.
I interviewed you about 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, that was 12 years ago.
12.
Yeah, long time ago. And I'm so honored to have you on my show.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And the show is called Awakening Now.
Okay, now's a good time.
Perfect time. So we talk about all things awakening. And I think Rick Archer doesn't need an introduction. Everyone else. I think it's a cultural thing now.
Okay.
Is there another show on the planet that runs so long and has interviewed so many awakening people? There isn't. So much respect and gratitude for that.
Thanks. It's really been a wonderful experience, and I've met so many wonderful people, and it's just really enriched my life. I have all these great friends all over the world that I've actually never met in person, but they're my best friends.
Yes, and you get to hear so many different perspectives, so many different experiences and different views. Yeah,
which is probably a point that we'll be talking about quite a bit, this idea of different views. But I find that personally very enriching. I think there might have been a point in my life when it might have been confusing to hear so many different perspectives, but now it's just enriching.
Right. So just before we get into all that, I ask everyone this question. What is your definition of awakening? Or
Well, that's a good question. First of all, I like the fact that you're kind of, well, I guess awakening is a noun, but I consider it a process, and really a never-ending process. It's not like you get awake and that's it, there's no more. And some people disagree with that, but I feel like we're all works in progress, and that no one who has ever walked the planet has necessarily reached the highest possibility of realization. In fact, Saint Teresa of Avila said that it appears that God himself is on the journey. So I consider awakening to be an opening of awareness to one's full potential, but that not only means the absolute dimension, or the pure consciousness, or whatever term you want to use in that sense, but it also includes a growing appreciation of all the dimensions of life, and life is multidimensional. And it would also, if we're going to use the word enlightenment, which is even more problematic, I would say it also includes a refinement and a maturation of the personality. Because some people claim to be awakened, and yet then they turn out to be sexual predators, or they're ripping people off financially or something like that. And if that's awakening, you can have it. I don't want that kind of awakening for myself or anybody else. I think that if we're going to use a term, it should, to retain its significance and its value, it should be reserved for people who have cultured a very holistic development. Now, of course, it's like the word education. You could say you've gained some education when you're in the third grade, and that's true. But you wouldn't say you're educated, which kind of implies that there's no more learning to do.
Right.
And if a person says I'm awakened, there's this kind of absolute quality to the statement, which I think does a disservice to the reality of human evolution.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a process. There may be
Yeah,
a
it's a
starting
process.
point, or like first shift, or a glimpse, or a
Yeah.
realization, and many awakenings happening.
Now I've had even recently, I've had some friendly conversations with Rupert Spira about this off camera. We just have been talking, and he used to be kind of heavy on sort of direct path, and he still kind of is. And I was more heavy on the progressive idea, but we kind of came to an agreement that it's both. You can have direct realization, even on day one, but there's going to be continual progress, and so there's no conflict between those two.
Yeah, I'm of the same position that it's all included, this and that and the other.
And some people say, you should give up seeking and so on and so forth. I think seeking that's like saying give up hunger. If you're hungry, if you eat some food, you won't be hungry anymore. So you will have given up hunger, but not through any kind of act of will. Hunger will have just dropped off. And the same with seeking. I think there's a natural stage at which one is feeling unfulfilled, and there's a craving or a desire or a yearning for deeper knowledge and experience. But at a certain point, that knowledge and experience grows to the point where the Sanskrit word is santosh, which means contentment, wells up to a significant degree. And you no longer feel like you're seeking, but you're still on this great adventure of exploration and learning and discovery.
Yeah. So the way I would say is that seeking energy doesn't stop, but it loses the desperation.
Good point. Yeah, good way of putting it.
Yeah. So what happened in your life? Can you maybe say something shortly or longly?
Yeah. Well, that
How
happened.
did that happen?
what you just said. And for me, my path has always been meditation and also all kinds of inquiry and study and thinking about the stuff. But I've always meditated, not always, but since I was 18, I've meditated twice a day for at least an hour each time. And I maybe I have obsessive compulsive disorder because I've never skipped it. I've always done it twice a day since 1968. And it started to benefit me from day one. I had been a very troubled kid. I'd grown up in a troubled family with an alcoholic father who suffered from PTSD from World War II, and my mother tried to commit suicide 3 times, and I ended up dropping out of high school and getting into drugs and getting arrested a couple of times for drugs, and so I was really going nowhere fast. But when I started taking drugs, it was to some extent with a spiritual aspiration. I was reading Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert's translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I'd sit around with my friends having philosophical conversations. And but after about a year of that, I was a mess, and I had actually started to dabble in hard drugs a little bit. Whoops! I almost dropped the phone. And one night I was sitting in my bedroom in the basement of my father's house, and I couldn't sleep because I was high on something. And I picked up a Zen book and started reading it. And as I read, I thought, wow, these guys were really serious, and I'm just fooling around. And if I keep fooling around like this, I'm going to live a very short, unhappy life. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to stop taking drugs, and I'm going to learn to meditate. And at the time, transcendental meditation was the most common thing available. So after a couple of weeks and some adventures in getting it all organized, I learned to meditate. And from the very first sitting, I just had a really deep, blissful, relaxing experience, and I felt much better afterwards. So I just kept doing it. And, within a couple of months, I had gotten back into school and I gotten a job, and I was, playing in a band. I used to be a drummer, and, I had a girlfriend, and none of those things had been happening when I was on drugs, because I was just too discombobulated to have any of that stuff. And after about 2.5 years, I became a teacher of it, and I taught thousands, not thousands. I taught about 1,000 people, and I spent several years in Switzerland with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I taught a lot of weekend courses and longer courses, and also participated in long courses. Sometimes we'd go for 6 months and just do a lot of meditation for a 6-month period up in the Swiss Alps or the French Alps or someplace. And that went on for a number of years. Sometimes I was giving lectures to 500 people. Sometimes I was cleaning toilets in some TM facility. It went back and forth. It cultured flexibility, I suppose. And I got married in 1987, and we finally stepped away from working for the TM movement in 1994, and stepped away from the TM movement entirely in about 1999 or 2000. No, maybe it was 2001, just because I'd say on the one hand, I was getting very independent in my thinking, and on the other hand, the TM movement was getting very weird. And so it just wasn't a good fit anymore. And
outgrown.
So, yeah, I think that was it. And I'm very grateful for all the benefits I derived. It just I was kind of a square peg in a round hole at that point. It just didn't fit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very quick summary. You might have some questions about all that.
Very interesting. I mean, you started meditating so early, and that's amazing that from the very first time you felt the benefit, because so many people, they try a little bit and next. What else can I do?
That particular practice is effortless to do. And so, I mean, when I was teaching truck drivers and all kinds of people who you wouldn't think of as the meditation type. Mm-hmm. But, most people took to it quite effortlessly. It's actually an ancient practice. In India, it's called Bhavatit Dhyan, which basically means transcendental meditation in Sanskrit. But a certain order of swamis in the north of India have been practicing it for hundreds of years. And I have a friend who actually went to India many times. You might like to interview this guy. And he interviewed a lot of those swamis, about 250 of them. And he had about half of them instruct him in meditation. And they all taught him basically the same thing.
Oh, wow.
So, so whereas the TM movement and Maharishi kind of gave the impression that this was a discovery that Maharishi had made, it was actually probably something he had learned in his ashram as a student, and he was just good at getting out there and marketing it to the world. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it's easy, it's effortless, and it takes advantage of what we could call the natural tendency of the mind to seek a field of greater happiness. And
could you tell the core of it, or it's just like kind of a couple of minutes?
Sure.
Yeah.
One uses a mantra, which is a sound that has it may have a meaning to somebody who speaks Sanskrit and understands that whole tradition, but for the average person, it has no meaning. And but as a sound, it has a certain vibratory influence, and when you repeat it effortlessly and as just a faint idea in the mind, eyes closed, the mind settles down. It's like a vehicle that enables the mind to settle down. And as the mind begins to settle down, and probably most people have experienced this, when you feel some quietness or some silence, it's usually associated with kind of a greater inner peace or happiness. And so as the mind settles down, it encounters greater charm or happiness. And so it just sort of follows that natural tendency effortlessly. And next thing you know, you may have arrived at a state of no mantra, no thoughts, just pure awareness. But then you're not used to that, so that some thoughts bubble up and you come out again, and then you realize you're out. You pick up the mantra again, take another dive. But it's like that. There's no concentration or control involved, as there are in some kinds of meditation, and it's also not a contemplative practice where you're sitting thinking about various topics.
Sounds simple enough.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
just sit down and let's meditate.
right. And I would add here that the TM movement kind of espouses it as a simple solution to all problems, and if you just do that, everything else is going to fall into place. I would say that it's more than that. There's more to it than that. There are other things that you should probably attend to in life. I mean, I know people who've been meditating for decades who I would consider to have very poor critical thinking skills, or to be unethical, or unkind, or they have troubles in their relationships, or health problems. I mean, so one still needs to take care of all aspects of life,
Right.
but like exercise or good diet or good sleep or anything else, it's something that if you add it to your routine can be very helpful, useful.
Yeah, I agree. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, but there's no rule. There's no one magic pill that would fix life in any way.
No. Yeah. And
Okay, so let's talk about all these various points of view and various traditions. And I mean, you interviewed so many people. But there must be something that everyone agrees on, or not, or not.
I guess. Well, I think probably among all the people I've interviewed, everyone agrees that there's more to life than meets the eye, and that there's something more profound that can be discovered or experienced. And obviously, people go about discovering it in different ways that that they discover, or that attract them. And I'm kind of reminded of Sri Ramakrishna here, who was very fond of the blind men and the elephant analogy. And even in Vedanta, there are like half a dozen different schools of Vedanta that completely disagree with each other on what the ultimate reality is. And Ramakrishna said, he said, that's no problem. It's like the blind man and the elephant. This guy, the leg feels like a tree trunk, and the tail feels like a snake, and the tusk feels like a spear, or whatever. And they all describe the elephant based on their experience, and they're each correct, but they don't have the whole picture. And he said it's very rare for somebody to have the whole picture. And I certainly don't claim to have it, but what I do, at least intellectually, is I try to take a God's eye view of things, which is to say, if you really had completely comprehensive understanding of the full nature of reality, you would probably respect and appreciate all the people who have particular perspectives, which aren't necessarily comprehensive, but which are valid in their own right, from their own angle. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We all see the same differently, express it differently. Maybe we're not even looking at the same part. I mean, our view is very limited.
Yeah, or you can imagine like a tree, and a bird sees it one way, and a human sees it another way, and a cow sees it another way, and all. Now there's something there, even though it's being perceived, and an insect sees it a different way. It's being perceived so differently by these different species, but there is something there. And I think, well, maybe one thing to throw in here is I think that the human beings have the perhaps unique gift of being able to get down to the real nitty gritty, as the saying goes, which is to get to a point where the all of one's perceptions can be in terms of the essential nature of everything, which is to say the self, or pure consciousness, or Brahman, if you want to use that term. So I don't think other species have that capability, perhaps, as far as I know. And that would be a good definition of awakening, actually, which you asked earlier, is a stage at which one perceives the essential nature of everything. And it's like, and this is an analogy from Vedanta, but let's say one goes into a pottery shop and sees all these different pots that are different colors, different shapes, and different sizes, and so on. And one would be seeing difference mainly. But someone who really understands pottery would go in there and say, oh, it's all clay. I can see that there's the essential nature of all these things is clay. but it's clay appearing in different forms and sizes and colors and so on.
Oh, I love
And
that.
yeah, and so it's correct to say that there's one could go into the shop and say there's nothing here but clay, and they would be right, but it wouldn't be the full picture because there are pots, and there's a word in Sanskrit called mitya, M-I-T-H-Y-A, which deals with this particular issue, and I think it's translated as well, there's another term, Vyavaharika, which is transactional reality. Mithya is kind of like the apparent reality, and one has to respect it. You don't step in front of buses because they're all pure consciousness. You have to respect the relative reality, but it's possible to arrive at a point where you also apprehend the ultimate nature of things.
Right, so we can see both.
Yes,
Actually.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's the same thing. Otherwise, it's unbalanced.
Yeah. And it's good. I mean, it's good we're talking about this because some people do privilege one over the other, or even are unaware of that there is another. Like probably most people in the world who would have no idea that there's a sort of deeper, essential nature to everything, in which everything is one, because everything is ultimately the same thing. And then there are other people who get on a spiritual path and they catch on to it's perhaps intellectual and not even experiential, but they emphasize the absolute nature of things to the point where they dismiss or undervalue the relative nature of things. And perhaps, and there's a lady named Jessica Nathanson who's interesting. I've interviewed her, and she has this website called The Glorious Both and her whole trip is basically dealing with people who had gotten so into Neo-Advaita that they had lost interest in their families and their jobs. They had become depressed, that the world was meaningless, it's all an illusion, and yada yada. And and some had even become suicidal. So I think it can be possibly relevant to somebody who's a recluse and wants to sit in a cave all the time to get so into the absolute perspective that the relative is virtually non-existent and certainly uninteresting. But for the average person, most of us, there has to be an integration or a balance between both fields of life.
Yeah, that's very important. Otherwise,
Yeah.
You can get lost in like ideas.
Yeah,
Even though it's
exactly.
the experience of like blissful states, but it all comes and goes. And then here you are back to the toilet or brushing teeth or cooking
Yeah,
meals.
right. Picking up the dog poop. It's
Yes.
just something I do every day because we have dogs.
Yeah.
Which is like Easter. It's an Easter egg hunt. Yeah, so what you said, ideas, that was interesting you mentioned that word, because I think a lot of people get focused on these kinds of teachings, Neo-Advaita and so on, but they don't necessarily have enough of the experiential component. And perhaps I don't, for whatever reason, maybe they don't have some practice which can give them a taste of it or whatever, but they end up, there's a Tibetan saying, which is, don't mistake understanding for realization. And then it goes on to say, don't mistake realization for liberation. But I think some people fall into that trap where they read so many books and listen to so many talks, and they end up kind of brainwashing themselves with an understanding, which is maybe a valid understanding, but it is not supported by their direct experience. And they kind of assume that they've had the realization that these books talk about, but there's something missing. And it's not a healthy state to be in.
Right. Good to know that it's temporarily. It will pass.
Oh, as all things do.
Yes.
I think George Harrison had an album, All Things Must Pass.
Yes. So when I see people are trapped in ideas, I'm not worried because it will pass. They are going into the trap to experience that, to learn something from it, to pick up wisdom, and then carry on.
That's true. I mean, I've gone through so many phases in my life, but maybe sometimes there's ways of accelerating one's transitions, so you don't have to get stuck in something for 20 years.
Right. Oh, maybe you do. Who
Or
knows?
maybe you do. Yeah. I mean, I think we're on a long timeline, and
Yes.
each lifetime is just the snap of the fingers.
Yeah, I think I want to mention that, well, 12 years ago when I just got into this, there was such a limited amount of information for me. For example, I was never in any movements. I didn't know what a guru was, or retreat, or even a spiritual teacher. So for me, it was very limited information.
Yeah.
And now there's
if you think that was limited 12 years ago, you should have seen it in 1968.
Yeah,
It was much more limited.
Exactly.
And we didn't even have the internet. So, now there's a flood of information.
Yeah. So with all this explosion of information, all the explosion of hearing and seeing different people talking about this in their own ways, it's so confusing, because somebody is sitting listening to these interviews and saying, oh, I didn't have that experience. I didn't have that experience. Oh, I want to have that experience. And it's just such a trap as well to be comparing.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, there might be a phase in someone's process where it would be good not to, listen to a million different things and get yourself confused. And then there might be a phase where it is good to do that and to compare and contrast and look at how different people discuss things. And as far as practices are concerned, you don't want to do a different practice every week. You want to find something that works for you and stick with it for a while. And, after a while, if it doesn't seem to be working, then maybe it would be good to try something else. Personally, even way back, I mean, back in the 70s, when I was definitely solid in the TM movement, I had enjoyed reading Carlos Castaneda and, various books. There's a great book by Elizabeth H called Initiation, which I remember made a big impact. And, I dabble around reading different things. But and these days, of course, it's a different thing every week, but I don't find it confusing. I somehow managed to fit it all into the puzzle.
Well, you had a lot of practice listening to all these over 700 interviews. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
a lot of different influences.
Yeah. And I think it's natural. I mean, variety is the spice of life. To use another metaphor, God is not a one-trick pony. And when you think about, speaking of God, I mean, if you think about astronomy and how many, I mean, they tell us that every star pretty much has planets around it. They've discovered that now. And if even 1% of those planets had intelligent life on them, we're talking about trillions of civilizations throughout the universe, with intelligent life. And undoubtedly, they all have their spiritual traditions and their religions and their teachers and all that stuff. And probably 99% of them say that ours is the only one, or ours is the only right one, and so on. But it's just like we're all kind of in this together, and throughout the universe, everybody's evolving, everything's evolving, and it's natural for there to be different spiritual traditions and paths according to the different cultural, climatic conditions and all the, so many variables that make people what they are. It wouldn't be natural in our world for everybody to be a Mormon, or everybody to be a Catholic, or everybody to practice TM or anything else. You gravitate toward, who is it? The Rolling Stones said, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need.
Yeah. So the invitation would be to enjoy your experience, and whatever that is the right one.
Yeah. And be inquisitive. I mean, it's great to be sort of, I mean, for me, it's the most interesting thing in life. And I've always found this stuff fascinating ever since I first discovered that it existed. But yeah, go ahead and read books and watch videos, and just, if you find it enjoyable and if you find that it seems to help you, it's a healthy thing, I think, to broaden your knowledge about this stuff. But again, don't be a dilettante. Dilettante means superficial dabbler, where you just, try a little of this and a little of that, and you never settle down and do a serious practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, what inspired you to start Buddha the gas pump?
Well, it's an interesting story. We had a little satsang going in my town. Didn't have a particular teacher, but 20 or 30 of us would sit around in a room once a week and have a discussion. And a number of the people in the room had been meditating for decades and had undergone some significant spiritual awakening. A few of whom you might like to interview. I can think of all kinds of people you might like to interview.
Cool.
But I found I would ask questions, and the rule of the group was you're supposed to just talk about your own experience. But someone would talk about their experience, and I would start saying, well, what about this? I'd start probing them with little questions. And the guy whose house we were having it in, he would get upset. He said, stop asking questions. You're supposed to just talk about your own experience and stop interviewing people. And so one day I was out in the garage working on a Bowflex machine, which is like an exercise machine. And I was listening to some talk by Adyashanti. And I thought, hey, I should start an interview show where I can actually do what is coming naturally to me, which is to interview people. And at first I just thought it would be like a radio show on my little local radio station here. And they didn't really want to do it. And so friends just encouraged me to, get it in video and put it out on the internet. And so I started doing that, and it took off, And there were all kinds of technical challenges and various software problems I've gone through over the years. One thing, the whole technology has evolved so much, but that's how it started.
Who was your first guest?
It was a couple named George and Mary Foster, who live here in town. In fact, my first dozen guests or so were people who just lived here in town because I didn't have the ability to do it over the internet at that stage. And so I just interviewed some local people. And then eventually I figured out how to use Skype and get Skype conversations to be recorded. And then I started branching out.
Wow. What a journey.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I had a full-time job, and I was doing this in the evenings and weekends and so on. And I wanted to make it freely available. I didn't want to charge anything. And I wanted to grow it to the point where, the naturally small percentage of people who would donate to such a thing would donate to the point where I could do it full time. And over the years, that it gradually got to that point. And it wasn't until about 2018 that I was able to totally drop any other kind of job and just do this. And we set it up as a nonprofit organization so that, people could make a donation and get a tax write-off and stuff.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And did Adyashanti came on very soon after you started?
Yeah, Adyashanti was guest number 85, I believe. So it probably would have been in the second year. He actually came to town here and gave a talk, and somebody else, I was somewhat involved in setting up his talk, but, and then I had lunch with him and a few other people, and I kind of, the person who had been helping him at the time was always kind of not cooperative in terms of having him do an interview. But then I'm sitting right next to him at lunch. And so I said, hey, can I interview you? And he said, sure. What's he going to say? So, then I ended up doing it. And then we had several other ones after that, like in his house up in California. I forget the name of the town.
How fun. Because listening to him, you got the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think I probably told him that story.
Are there any questions that you ask every guest on the show?
Well, that's a good question. Trying to think. Remember the Three Stooges? Did you ever watch the Three Stooges?
No.
Okay, you won't get this joke then, so I won't bother telling you. Well, actually, the Three Stooges are these comedy characters, and one of them was supposed to be kind of dumb, and he was the funniest guy. And one time they had some problem, and they're standing there trying to figure out what to do, and he's kind of scrunching up his face this way and that, and finally he says, "I'm trying to think, but nothing happens." Questions I ask every time. Well, there's certain themes I'd say that I'm fond of myself and that I often bring up in interviews, some of which we've already talked about here. Mm-hmm. The ongoing nature of evolution. The one thing that fascinates me is the omnipresent nature of intelligence. I feel like God is just staring us in the face. If you think of anything, a leaf that you're looking at or a pebble, and you consider what you're actually looking at, and the cells, the molecules, what's actually going on there, it's this marvel of intelligence and order, an expression of orderly laws of nature. And when you consider that there's no cubic centimeter in the entire universe where you wouldn't find an orderly expression of laws of nature, you think, wow, I mean, that's what God is. It's this omnipresent intelligence within which everything is contained, and by which or within which everything is orchestrated. So sometimes I steer guests into that kind of discussion, which interests me. Mm-hmm. And I've actually interviewed a number of people who are kind of specifically interested in that kind of thing. And I mean, of course, the kinds of questions I would ask or topics I would discuss would depend a lot on the guest and the nature of their particular thing. Like I interviewed a lady a few weeks ago who has an autistic daughter, and she's also a psychiatrist, and she believes that autistic children are kind of these representatives of some higher consciousness that's dawning in the world, and they're these people, they're really special. It's not like they're just damaged or something, but they actually have a special gift and a special role to play. And so we talked about that. Or I would, and there's a categorical index on batgap.com where we have all the interviews organized by different categories. So, there's all the different religious traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, etc., Sufism. And then there are, scientists, and there are channelers, and there are near-death experiences, and
these are fun.
Kundalini awakenings, and all the different things.
Have you ever had a near-death experience?
No, I didn't. I had a really fascinating experience one time. It wasn't near death, but it was like during sleep, and it was like a dream, but it was so powerful and so profound that it seemed like it wasn't just a dream. It was something more. And in the dream, I was ushered into a room, and I was made to lie down on my stomach and hold on to some handles at about shoulder height. And this being with a spear or a trident or something started stabbing my spine up and down, and just stabbing it. And it was excruciating. But at the same time, something very profound was happening. And I just held on for dear life. And I eventually came up out of it. And as I came up out of it into the waking state, this more greater and greater bliss and freedom and just relief began to dawn in my awareness. And I just felt like, when I fully woke up, it was like I felt like I had just been released from having been bound by steel cords or something for God knows how long, and they had been broken. And I for several days, I walked around practically with my jaw hanging open, just kind of, holy shoot, what happened? It was just like this profound awakening. And then later on, I heard that there's some Tibetan practice where you're supposed to imagine Lord Shiva stabbing your spine with a trident and piercing your chakras. And I thought maybe somebody else had that same experience, and they reverse engineered it into a practice. So anyway, I don't know why I got off on that tangent, but I guess you asked me about profound experiences or something.
The near-death experience.
Near death.
Yeah.
You asked about near death. Yeah, no, I'm pretty healthy, and fortunately, I haven't had a near death experience. Knock on wood.
Me neither. I never
I think
had
they're
any.
interesting, though.
Yeah,
They're really interesting.
I like to listen to them because people come in and with their different visions, but they talk about interesting things that are not visible in everyday reality. No, we have any idea about it if you don't experience it.
Right.
Whatever that is, a dream or an imagination, hallucination, we can call it whatever you want, but that's their experience. They went through.
And one interesting thing about it is that, the kind of the mainstream scientific attitude is that we are just our bodies, and when the bodies die, that's the end. And the idea that consciousness transcends the body or is some kind of universal field, and the body is more like a radio, transmitter receiver than it is a generator of consciousness or creator of consciousness. That is alien to the modern scientific paradigm. But some people have near-death experiences, and they experience things like while they're under anesthesia during operation or something that there's no explanation for. Like there's one example where somebody experienced that there was a red sneaker. A sneaker is like a kind of shoe on the roof of the hospital, and later on somebody went up there and found the sneaker, or that there was something on top of some cabinet in the operating room that couldn't be seen by anybody in the room, but somebody went up and checked, and there was that thing up there. Or there was one lady I interviewed who experienced she had a car accident. She was in surgery, and she experienced that her uncle, I think it was buying a particular kind of candy bar from the machine in the waiting room. And later on, when she came out of anesthesia and talked to her uncle, she said, "You bought a Snickers bar. I saw you buy a Snickers bar." And the guy didn't even eat candy ordinarily, but he had bought this thing. And sure enough, he had bought that. She saw it while she was under anesthesia. So what that kind of proves is that consciousness can function independent of the body. So it's not just something that is generated by the brain, and that and that is limited to the senses that are in your body. It can actually, one can perceive things at a distance. So that in itself upsets the paradigm that I think really needs to be upset in order for society to evolve in its understanding of what life is.
Right. Yes, we can look just at the tail of the elephant and say, "Oh, this is how it is."
Exactly. And it's funny because that's another theme that interests me personally, is just the whole science spirituality interface. Because science is obviously a very powerful, influential thing in our world, and it's done a lot of good and a lot of bad, but it's really transformed our world. And but science without spirituality, I think, is dangerous. It's like children playing with guns or something. We need spiritual maturity in order to counterbalance the powerful influence that scientific technologies have, including AI. And we can talk about AI if you want, because I'm really into it. That sort of interface interests me a lot. And part of my mission in life, even when I first became a meditation teacher at the age of 21, was the feeling that the world needs a spiritual awakening in order to save society from possible extinction, or at least from great troubles and tribulations. And the more we can raise collective consciousness, the better life will be for everyone. So I really think that spirituality is an essential component of that. And that's been one of my motivating drives. And another thing that, well, you want to comment on any of that before I say anything else?
Well, I think the science is mostly I know, but the mystery of life is I don't know. I'm open. I don't know. And
you say the mystery, is that the word you used?
Yes,
mystery.
the mystery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if I know, I'm close to the mystery. If I don't know, I'm open to this miracle.
Very good point. Yeah.
Because when I know what I can see, hear, taste, smell, and everything else is concepts and visions and things like that. But there is so much more to it.
Yeah.
The invisible that cannot be described. How about that?
Yeah. There's an organization in England called the Galileo Commission, and they named it that because back when he invented the telescope, Galileo invited the church authorities to look through his telescope and to see that Jupiter had moons. And for some reason, the idea of Jupiter having moons was against church doctrine. Don't ask me why. And so they refused to look through his telescope because they said, well, it can't be true because it's against church doctrine. So I think, the reason these guys in England called their thing the Galileo Commission is that a lot of scientists are behaving that way even now. Somebody like Dean Radin comes up with some really interesting research showing that psychic abilities are real, or that, some other kinds of things he studies, and they won't even look at his research. They say it can't be true. I'm not going to take the time to look at it. So I think if they act that way, they're not being scientists. They're being religious fanatics. There's a term, scientism, which means like fundamentalist science, where you're not open-minded.
Yeah. So we need to kind of find the balance between what I know and what I don't know, and just live here.
Yeah.
And be open to the mystery.
Right. And science and spirituality can actually be allies. I gave a talk on this at the Science and Non-Duality conference in, 2015, but they can be allies in the quest for knowledge. They're not enemies.
Right. It's like the elephant's trunk and elephant's tail. They on the same elephant.
Needs them both. You're right. There's two other things I've got going on, but feel free to ask me questions. But two other major things that I work on. One is something called the Association for Spiritual Integrity, and I think you might be a member of it.
Yes,
Aren't you a member of it?
Yes, I am.
And that started because I was at the Science and Non-Duality conference, and I gave a talk called The Ethics of Enlightenment. And Jack O'Keefe was in the audience, and also a guy named Craig Holliday. And they had given similar talks, and we hadn't really collaborated or coordinated. We didn't know we were all giving a similar talk. And so we had lunch afterwards, and we found we were all really interested in the idea that in contemporary spirituality, spiritual teachers, spiritual movements, there have been a lot of ethical breaches and misconduct, and that we should try to do something to help correct the situation. So we decided to form an organization, which became the Association for Spiritual Integrity. And we have over 700 members now and over 50 member organizations. And we've given talks at Harvard Divinity School conferences and the Parliament of World Religions. And we have all these webinars and different things. And so that's something that, one of my activities. You want to say anything about that before I go on?
Yes, and it's very important activity because, as you say, somebody that says, I woke up or I'm awakened now, and a lot of people can start worshiping or following, and I'm awake doesn't mean that I'm honest or I am moral or I am kind. Right.
And then he wants to have sex with all the women in his group, and then he just says, "Oh, I'm not doing that. God is doing it. I'm not the doer," or some crazy nonsense like that.
What comes to mind is John of God. Do you remember that one?
In
Brazil. The crazy story.
I interviewed a lady who probably made 50 trips down to John of God, and she took people down there in groups and all. We had quite a discussion about that.
That's one of the biggest ones, kind of.
Yeah. And even some popular gurus. I mean, my own teacher, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, had some real ethical problems in terms of his sexual affairs and stuff, although he claimed to be a life celibate. And then there's all kinds of stuff with Osho, and we don't have to get into all the different names, but I mean, people who are aware of these things.
It's good. It's good you bring that up, because who to trust?
Yeah, and people get disillusioned. I mean, I've actually heard of people committing suicide because they got so disillusioned by some spiritual teacher, and that's a real crime. I mean, that's a real shame.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, again, I think spirituality is such a precious thing, and it's a responsibility, if you're going to be a teacher, to not give it a bad name and to not disillusion people and to not violate their trust, because you put a lot of trust in a spiritual teacher. And it's like putting your trust in a school teacher. If you're a little child, and if the school teacher starts molesting the child or doing something like that, it's such a traumatic experience. And perhaps it's even more so with spirituality, because it's such a deep, essential need in human life.
What is your view on people waking up, let's say, having an experience, a shift, and then starting a YouTube channel, starting to share their experiences, getting serious on YouTube right away?
And it depends on how they do it. If they remain humble and they admit that they don't know everything and that they are learning, but they have something useful to share. Like, I interviewed a young guy from Denmark a couple weeks ago named Lucas Bergendahl, and he's a very sweet guy. I really liked him. He's 29 years old, and it hasn't been that long since he had a spiritual awakening, but he's very humble and he's very honest and very kind of self-effacing. Like, he'll tell you about all his problems and his shortcomings and everything else, but he's really got something. And but if somebody, they have some kind of awakening and they kind of proclaim that they are the avatar, and and that everybody should worship them, and believe me, there are actually people who do this, then that's problematic.
Yeah.
And it's probably a little risky, to set yourself up as a spiritual teacher, because it can go to your head. You could end up with all these people, like, glare, admiring you and praising you and wanting to be near you, and so on and so forth. If you're not really mature, you can get an inflated ego.
Right. I think this is also a question of ethics,
It is, definitely. There's a woman I interviewed named Joan Shiva-Pita Harrigan. Shiva-Pita is like her spiritual name, and she's a good friend. We stay in touch, but she's a real expert on Kundalini. She's written some big, thick books about it, and she had an institute in Tennessee where people could go for a couple of weeks. And anyway, she describes the various ways in which Kundalini can rise, and there's something called a deflected rising, where it rises to a certain extent, but then it kind of gets off on a sidetrack, and one can have it can endow a person with great shakti and charisma and eloquence and bliss, and they can become a very impressive person, and they think they're enlightened. Other people think they're enlightened, but actually they haven't reached it. It's off on a sidetrack, and they end up causing trouble and usually having some kind of crash and burn experience. So that might explain some of these situations.
Yeah. Crash and burn.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention is I mentioned AI. So there's this wonderful fellow that I interviewed named Nipun Mehta. He's Indian, but he lives in California these days. And he has an organization called Service Space, which operates all over the world. Millions of people are involved in it. And he started this thing that he calls the Compassion Bot Network, which is it's a network of AI chatbots that he actually provides for free to various spiritual organizations and people and stuff. So he asked me if I would like to have one of these. And I said, yeah, because I'm kind of a computer geek and I was interested in AI. And so I set this thing up, and I'm helping other people set them up as well. Maybe you would like to have one. And yeah, we can do that. And I've uploaded over 100,000 documents to it, not one by one, usually in batches, but we've uploaded 1,700 of the world's sacred texts the well-known ones such as the Bible and the Quran and all that, but also very more obscure sacred texts and transcripts of thousands and thousands of spiritual discussions and videos and books and all kinds of stuff. So there's a link to it there's a menu item to it on batgap.com, and you can explore it. But people are finding that it's really generally better than ChatGPT or any of the commercial bots for spiritual or philosophical discussions. And there's more and more features we keep adding to it. For instance, if you ask it a question and then it gives you a nice answer, it usually gives you some follow-up questions you might want to ask or some recommendations. But then at the bottom, it has some links to the sources from which it got the information. And we're getting it developed now so that they will be video source links. So that let's say I had a transcript of my interview with you on there, and if it drew upon that interview for its answer, then in the video source link, if you click on it, it would actually take you to the specific point in the video where it got the relevant information for that answer.
Wow, that's the next level, right?
It is. So this is something that so, and there's all kinds of possibilities on the horizon as this stuff evolves. And so that's something that I actually spend a lot of my time on, developing this thing.
Wow. Yes, I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's fun.
Sounds good. I mean, if you could upload all the Liberation Unleashed forum,
I could.
all the threads. I mean, everything up there.
Let's talk about that. We can do that. And then what'll be cool about it is then you can have a chat bot where a person can like interact with the entire data corpus. That's the word they use for this kind of thing, a data corpus of Liberation Unleashed. Right. And it'll take the entire knowledge of Liberation Unleashed to compose particular answers to any questions that people want to ask.
It's a little bit other way around. I mean, the guides are asking questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Like you can have a AI guide. Yeah,
I'll help you set that up. And
like I don't go on the forum anymore. I just got tired of typing the same questions over and over again.
Yeah, so now they don't have to ask you for the answers. They can just ask the bot because you already answered them, and they can get anything they want out of it.
Right.
And like there was one guy named Jem Bendel that I interviewed, and he wrote a book called Breaking Together, which he feels like there's going to be a sort of societal collapse due to climate change and various other factors. He analyzes all these different things in his book. And he has a bot that he calls Gem Bot because his name is Gem, and it basically the knowledge in it just consists of his entire book. But it was a big book. It took me 18 hours to listen to, and so it's a way of interacting with his book. You can ask it questions, and it'll just give you answers based upon the collective knowledge that he put in the book. Yeah. Wow. So that's an example. So there's a whole bunch of these bots. They keep growing up. And Nipun, amazingly, he doesn't charge. Nipun estimated it would take over $1 million to develop one of these bots individually with all of its capabilities that it has, but he doesn't charge anything. And of course, everybody under the sun can't have one. But if it's relevant and if kind of a spiritual or positive thing, and if a person has enough information to put in it to give it a nice solid knowledge base, then they would be eligible.
Oh wow. So level up then.
Pardon?
We go to level up.
Yeah.
Like reaching new possibilities, opening up.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'll definitely look into it.
Yeah, we can you can check out the one on Batgap. Just go on Batgap to the Batgap bot menu and get a feeling for how it works. But then we can follow up and get it set up for you.
Sweet. Is there anything you want to say that we haven't touched on? something?
You asked me what question I ask people in interviews. That's one I usually ask towards the end. I says, is there anything I haven't thought of that you want to talk about? But nothing comes to mind. I mean, I could talk to you all day because you're interesting, and it's always fun talking about all this stuff.
Okay, I have another question.
Okay, good.
I have a question that I ask everyone.
Go for it.
Right. So somebody who is watching these videos, interviews, are still a seeker and is looking for that shift or that awakening. What would be your best advice?
Well, Jesus said, seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. And there's a saying in India, I don't know whether the guru says this or God says this, but take one step toward me and I'll take 100 steps toward you. So I think that the very desire for this kind of knowledge and experience is a really good start. And the very fact that one has such a desire is important. And it's actually probably kind of rare still. If you consider all the 8 billion people in the world, how many people really know about this and want it? So you have the desire, and that's great. And probably anybody watching this has that desire. And then you need to figure out, all right, well, what can I do with it? How can I fulfill it? And so you kind of what we were saying earlier, you need to sort of shop around a little bit, check out different possibilities, watch different videos, listen to different teachers, see what resonates with you. But always keep your powers of discrimination. I know of examples of people who signed over their entire inheritance of $900,000 to some spiritual teacher because he told them the money had bad karma attached to it and he could cleanse it for them. So don't do anything like that. Feel free to run away if you start to get a kind of a bad vibe. Or anybody asks you to go to bed with them or give them all your money or something. Be careful. There's a lot of half-baked spiritual teachers out there.
Right.
But there are some sincere ones. There are some good ones. And if you find that, you resonate with what someone is saying, then great. Maybe that's somebody you should pay more attention to. I would also say, though, that at least because of I have a bias, for actually meditating, doing a practice because it worked so well for me. And maybe that's not the right thing for everybody. Different people can do different things. But, just from my own experience, I found that just aside from reading and listening to stuff, just sitting and closing my eyes and having a deep, dive into pure awareness twice a day has had tremendous benefits. So if you can find a way of doing that, and I have a friend, actually, another guy whom you might like to interview, named Jerry Freeman, who's been doing all this research on the traditions of effortless transcending, he calls it, that have been going around the world. And it turns out most spiritual traditions have something of that nature. And he's been trying to compile it all into a document so that people could read that and pursue something that is in line with their particular tradition or interests and that would actually be effective for them. For instance, there's a guy named Lawrence Freeman whom I've interviewed. I think he's based in France. And he has a Christian type of meditation that's very similar to what I've been practicing, but that uses a Christian mantra. And hundreds of thousands of people have learned it. And it's a very popular, inspiring thing. So, if that's your orientation, maybe that would be good. Maybe TM would be good. Maybe, I don't know, some guy just contacted me this morning who has some kind of meditation that he's offering that I think would be effective based upon what I looked at. So search around, as I said, as Jesus said, seek and you shall find.
Good advice.
Yeah.
So hopefully all these seekers that are listening, they are already seeking. They just need a little bit of perseverance or dedication.
Yeah. And what I've found, and what you have probably found also, is that when you do have this intention and you start sort of pursuing it, all kinds of opportunities open up to you. that you wouldn't have expected this information or this person or this opportunity. It's almost like, you know, God or nature or whatever is responding to your interest and giving you what you're looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
Like knocking comes from inside.
That's right. Good point. Yeah, I think Rumi or somebody said something like that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Rick. It's such a
Yeah,
pleasure
thank you.
to communicate and share with you.
I can't do namaste because I have to hold the phone. I'll do it one-handed namaste. Yeah.
Yeah. How does one hand namaste sound?
Yeah, one hand clapping.
What's the sound?
Yeah, it's a great talking to you, and we'll be in touch. We'll get you going on that bot thing and anything else I can do to help. And if you want to keep doing these interviews, and I have a whole 700 suggestions for you.
Oh, wonderful! Because I was looking for suggestions, and here you are. You come up.
Yeah, and I have all these emails of all these people, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with people.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much. And thank you
You're
everyone for watching and listening. And please comment, like, share, do everything you can. Thank you. I really appreciate this. That what gets this channel more visible. It reaches more people.
Yep.
Thank you,
The more
Rick.
the merrier.
Yeah, the more the merrier.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.